Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Accuracy in America, the show that if you're looking for something to watch while the Hollywood writers and actors are on strike, we can fill your time. And I'm your host Don Irvine, joined by my co-host Brian McNichol.
Good morning. Hello, deplorables, dregs, despicables, chumps, Neanderthals, semi fascists, and of course, those dog faced pony soldiers.
Yeah, don't you think we'd be a good fill-in? I mean,
Yeah, that's right. We're still creating.
that's right. We're still creative. We're not going on strike, and we
We've
actually don't have
worked,
a written script per se. So, right? I mean,
yeah, we've
this
worked out our labor deal.
Yeah, this is a low budget production. We don't have all those issues.
We could cut your pay, but I think
Yeah.
you guys know what that means.
All right. Well, good things are going well. I mean, we're still talking about the heat, and Hillary is talking about the heat and saying you can thank the MAGA Republican for your heat here, your climate change. Is this ever going to end with these people?
No, no. And the thing about it is, you know what? I've been having fun on Twitter. So what I go on and put, and this is true, that China, Russia, and the mainland U.S. have all had their coldest uh, ever recorded temperatures last winter. So if getting hot in the summer means there is global warming, then it getting cold in the winter must mean there's not, right? So I put on there, therefore, there is no global warming. And they're like, what's averages, man? It's like, okay, you can't extrapolate that one hot day in July equals global warming. And I can't extrapolate that, 3 cold days in the winter equals no global warming, right? So y'all quit doing it. And, you get various cussed out in various languages and whatnot, but that's all right.
Can you go and use Google Translate to see exactly what they're saying?
That's right.
Yeah,
Ooh, that's
I
a
mean,
good one.
you know, I mean the other thing about this too is just that as you talk about, when we get these extreme cold spells, it's like ice age. You remember, you go back to our youth days of our youth almost, when they were talking about the coming ice age. But that's not the popular thing. I mean, the cold weather, they really don't want to talk about it if they can help it, because it kind of screws up their narrative. They do
Yeah,
want to talk about hot weather. I mean, and look, not, we're not denying it's been pretty hot. I mean, Spencer is out there in Phoenix, and it's been doggone hot. I didn't actually, I was listening to or reading something about, the pavement. And I've always known, I think, it seems to be common sense, is that the pavement will get really, really hot when it's 110 degrees. It's not
hmm
110 degrees on the pavement. It's considerably higher. And they were saying, it can get to like 170 degrees, very quickly, on pavement. So, there have been people who touched pavement, and been burned, as a result of that. It's like, the Phoenicians and people in Arizonans, in the more extreme parts of Arizona where you've got that hot weather, they have adapted over time.
right.
My sister-in-law has been living in Mesa for, I don't know, 20 something years, and she knows that, when it comes to exercising, if she's not going to be at the gym, any exercising is really going to come in the early morning or later in the evening. And even the evening, though, might be a little bit of a crapshoot, because if it's 120 in the afternoon, maybe it might get down to 80ish, in the evening or something like
Right.
that. So there's no guarantee that could still be rather uncomfortable for some people. But, I mean, look, take precautions. I'm thinking about, I go to a gym, and it's in this Gold's Gym here nearby. They've had this one long-term problem lately, which is that the air conditioning is not working properly. Okay, so at 4:30 in the morning, when the temperature outside is between 60 and 70, and they're running the AC, it's still okay. Now, if I go back, here in an hour or so after the show is over, and I go back, it is stifling in that
Yeah.
gym. And if you go upstairs, they have one like the studio, which they do all the aerobics or whatever. That one, the AC is running fine. They also have a smaller room, which is really for the personal trainers and things like that. They've got a bunch of equipment. They've got these 2 huge ceiling fans, but that place is boiling. I mean, even at even at 6 o'clock in the morning, it is hot. You don't want to even be in there. I mean, and I think you have to look at your age, your fitness, and also say, I am only going to do a certain amount of exercise or a certain amount of activity.
Right.
I don't want to overheat, all these other things that could cause stress on your body. There's a lot of common sense to me that goes on with all this that people don't practice, but all these dire warning, from the left, we're this planet is going to be extinct in essence. It's not going to be livable because it's going to get too hot.
Yeah, that's and then I saw this the other day, and somebody was writing about that, and they were like, "Well, it's 90 degrees, it's very dangerous, and when it's 95, humans cannot function outside." I'm like, "Well, everyone in Louisiana and Texas begs to differ because they function for months out of the year at 95, right? 3-4 months a year, So they're people are used to it. It's not extreme. This is not one of the hottest years on record. It's hot in some places. It's cooler than normal in other. You are getting some wacky weather because, for one thing, we haven't had any solar activity in like 8 or 9 years. And the last few weeks, there's been a lot. There's been a ton. So, things are happening with the sun. The El Nino and La Nina are flipping. So, your water, ocean water is circulating through the world at a faster rate than it usually does. So yeah, you're going to get some wacky weather for a little while, but the idea that we've added carbon, therefore we're trapped in this heat vessel is, ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, and I know, I mean, I'm sure that if I went back, and took the time to look back at stories that are appearing today about, these, how certain crops, they're decimated because of the weather. I have a feeling that, if you look back, through history, it's like everything else. There are these cycles, right? I mean, there are times when, the corn gets stunted, and there are times when the corn is bountiful, and
Right.
it goes that way with a lot of these things that we grow. Weather is changeable, and it can go from one extreme to another, and as a result of that, sometimes you have a bounteous harvest in certain things, and sometimes you don't, and
Right.
and we're used to that. I mean, I mean, seriously, I mean, how many people on a daily basis are thinking about the price of oranges or corn, and then try to come and say, but it was so much cheaper last year or 2 years ago or whatever. I mean, I can't I don't know. I mean, it's not
Yeah.
important enough for me to focus on. I don't know.
Right. I got you. So I was like, yeah, other than that too is, the world's greener. One of the things that's happened is there's more plant life, a lot more plant life than there was 100 years ago. So part of that is how we manage things, and part of it is the world has grown much more prosperous in that time. There's many, we've taken millions and millions of people off the hunger and poverty, out of deep poverty, out of hunger. And so there's a lot more plants growing in the world, all over the world, like, 30% more. So, that has some effect on it too. And we haven't even taken stock of that really.
Right. I mean, there's always there's kind of a balance that's go on there, but some of this, the way the patterns have changed, and so we wind up with more arable land in some places now where we can grow more things, and then it just depends. I mean, it's just, I can't, it almost just seems like, the leftists are thinking that we're going to go back to the great dust bowl, or we're going to have this big famine or something or other. They just keep throwing stuff at us to kind of have us cower in fear that, the world is going to end almost.
Yeah. Fear mongering is what they do. They get you afraid of things, the fear of the other, it's why they're racist like they are. It's why they're xenophobic like they are. It's why they treat Israel like they do. It's like anything that's the other, they gang up against it.
Yeah. All right. So Russia and Ukraine, it just seems that there's not a whole lot's going on there in terms of not one side of that is not progressing very much. One thing that did kind of disturb me the other day, though, was I think there was a story about how the Russians have mined outside the nuclear power plant out there, and it's like, okay, I don't know. I mean, there's certain things. I mean, I know that this is part of war, is that you create these minefields. This has been going on for a long time, but boy, I don't know. I'm feeling a little uneasy that they've gone to the extent that they're actually mining outside the the nuclear power plant. I mean, this could go really badly. In my
Yeah,
opinion.
and three or four layers deep too.
Yeah.
There's large swaths of Ukraine that won't be usable for years to decades after the war because the Russians have mined them so thoroughly. This one of the things they do. The Russians like to inflict terror and horror. They want you to hate them badly when they leave. There has been the Ukraine is trying to take back some of the territory, and so what the Russians have done is they've attacked all along the front to make Ukraine defend the whole front line. So it's kind of a stalemate, which is it has been for some time and likely will be into the near future.
How much of this, in terms of what's been happening out there, is going to have any, is it going to have any impact on the elections in 2024? I mean, how much does it shape what the Biden administration does? We've talked before many times about we have a group of Republicans who've been against our support of, supplying material, the money, all this kind of stuff like this. I mean, what do you have? Do you have a crystal ball, or do you have anything out there? Just your feeling about how this plays out politically?
Well, I think the criticism that the Republicans need to make is it's not how was the war handled, because once it started, it's been handled pretty much by the handbook that American presidents use in these things. You're trying to get the right mix of weapons that will help our ally, but won't trigger a wider conflict or nuclear response or whatever. And you're trying to be effective, but at the margins, and you're trying to get other countries to be involved, so it's not just us v. Russia or whatever. So, which he's kind of done all that pro forma. The thing to hit on is we wouldn't have been in this conflict at all if Trump had been reelected, because Putin was afraid of Trump. Trump spoke Russian. He has his own security service. So he knows, he was able to tell Putin things about himself that Putin did not realize Trump would know, right? So, when Obama was president, Putin marched right in and took Crimea. And then when Trump was president, he didn't move at all. And then when the weaker successor was installed, he moved right into Ukraine. So, he's figured out who the chumps are in America, and he's taken advantage of it. So I think that that's the issue to make, is Trump or Putin did not mess with me. Trump should say, and he had no problems walking all over Joe.
Wait a minute, did you say Trump spoke Russian?
Yes, yeah, he does. He's spent some time over there. Apparently, he learns languages real quickly. And that is the reason the interpreters all freaked out, is because most of the conversation took place in Russian, and she didn't realize that Trump would be ready for that.
Okay. I definitely have not been paying close enough attention to Trump's linguistic skills.
He apparently knows a lot of languages, that he can learn them quickly, or learn enough of them to communicate in them quickly.
Though I would like to hear Trump speak Spanish, but I have a feeling it just wouldn't sound very authentic. I don't know.
I think you got to be careful with that. But
yeah,
he does like
you don't want me speaking Spanish either,
huh?
You don't want me speaking Spanish.
No, me either. So I hear you.
That's interesting. Okay, well, but yeah, who knows? I mean, and that's right. I mean, we've talked about that. We've said that many times before too, in terms of this war is largely a byproduct of the election results, that the foreign policy under Trump held these guys at bay, and we've had a huge mess since Biden took over. It's been like they're like, okay, well now we can go do whatever because Biden's not going to give much pushback.
Right.
But as we have said before too, we will give Biden credit for supporting Ukraine, even against a lot of people in his own party who don't like that.
Right.
So we have to give him credit for that. There's not a whole lot of things that we can give Biden credit for, but that's something that he's been on the right side of.
Yeah. And once it started, once he let it start,
yeah,
that's what he had to do.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I'm going to be curious because there's so many different things, well, I guess I'll get to that in a little bit. I also want to ask you about, what happened in the UK. So the UK had just a few like special elections, because Boris Johnson vacated a seat and things like that. And it didn't go very well for the Conservative Party. Then again, I mean, there were conservative seats that had been won by a fairly good margin the last time around that they lost either by big or they squeaked by in some cases this time around. This looks like it's a continuing pattern for the Conservative Party in Great Britain that, an election which has to be called by 2025, unless there's a major turnaround, the Tories are in big trouble election-wise here for the national election.
They went 1 and 2 in these recent ones. Yeah, that's right. That's right. No aggressive action whatsoever. They lost 2 that they had used to win, and they hung on to 1 that they are used to winning by larger margins. But I mean, they picked a soft conservative, right? The Rishi Sunak, and that's people who want conservative leadership are looking for bold leadership. They're not looking for Democrat light or the UK version of Democrat light, but that's what they've got, and they're rejecting it.
Yeah, I mean, if there's been any conservative prime minister that has made less news or something to that effect, I mean, tell me who it is, because Sunak it's almost like he's kept a really low profile.
Yeah,
right.
He's trying to not to make mistakes. He's trying to get it in the barn, safely. But I don't know. I don't know that the particular people involved in this, or some indication that had something to do with it. But I don't know that this is a harbinger of a big labor landslide, because they don't have a popular leader everybody wants to get behind either.
Right. And I mean, that's the problem. But I mean, the UK is known for shifting sentiments. It's just like, when the Tories are in power, if you've got a leader like Margaret Thatcher, you're probably going to have a good long run. She was bold, she was decisive, she was really effective.
Yeah.
Did a great job. And Labor has struggled, mightily to find, really good leaders. I mean, Tony Blair was. I didn't have a whole lot of objection to him. I mean, he seemed like a decent guy. I mean, not so far off the ledge, a type of thing like that. But because especially compared to other labor leaders who are terrible. But it's almost as if the conservatives, and Sunak are thinking like, okay, Labor Party doesn't really have a super strong competitor to me. So therefore, as you're saying, it's like, let's just guide this thing through. We will call the election really at the last minute that we have to, or we'll set it up before the deadline expires that we have to call the election, and we'll go ahead and do that, because that at least guarantees our power until that point in time. But UK citizens they are a fickle bunch, and inflation is running still extremely high in Great Britain. That has got to come down a lot, I think, in order for the Conservatives to manage to, if they're going to maintain any control. I think at the very least, they were going to lose a lot. They'll lose a lot of seats. If they hold on, they will probably hold on by the slimmest of majorities, or they may have to work themselves into some kind of, weird coalition. That's the thing about Europe, is that these coalition governments,
yeah, that never works. That's one thing, is like, you say that people knock our 2-party system, right? And it's really under a lot of fire now, because you're like, okay, we got an 84-year-old guy running against an 80-year-old guy, and Nobody is wild about either one of them, right? The Democrats aren't, wild about Biden. A lot of Republicans aren't wild about Trump. We need a third choice, and so there is some third choice people emerging. Joe Manchin, Huntsman, there's a couple more, or RFK Jr. There's some possibilities out there, and they're going ballistic because they believe that would hand the election to Trump. I'm not sure about that, but that's the calculus that the left has right now. But there's hunger for a third alternative to them. But when you get into actually having three parties, right, then you get in, these power sharing arrangements. Bibi's over there in Israel. He's trying to govern with a coalition of the far right and the far left. There is oddly some things that the extremes agree on that no one else agrees on. But that's not a platform, right? You can't put down a program for the country's improvement and based, when that's your means of support.
Well, I mean, it was, Great Britain, I think one of the last power sharing type of things like that. I mean, you had a conservative prime minister, and I guess you had a deputy prime minister or whatever was the labor leader, and things like that. And then, and I think that was Clegg who was at that time or something. And it was, it's untenable. They agree in principle to work together so they can actually form a government, because that you need to say, we've got the majority. This group here and this group here is now the majority of the total seats in the parliament, and therefore we're going to govern. But boy,
that's usually the last thing they end up cooperating on.
So. Oh yeah, no, I mean, it just and it's like, do you really expect them to hold firm for any real length of time, in terms of keeping that coalition together and keeping it stable? That, those are unstable governments by and of itself. From the day that they are formed, they could collapse in time. I mean, how many times has the government in Italy collapsed?
Right. Although she's doing a pretty good job. She's
doing fine now, but I mean,
some high marks.
And all these other things. I mean, it just makes your head spin. And look what's happening in Spain. I mean, the conservatives thought they were going to win pretty much outright, and I haven't seen the last results, but a couple of days ago, I guess they were going to win. They were winning more seats than they had before, but maybe not enough to control the government unless they get into a coalition or something like that.
Right.
I mean, but it looks like the conservative would wind up being the prime minister and force the lefty out. But it did that. Those results did not go as they had quite hoped. They had thought they were going to, I think, really gain full control. So that government's going to be a little iffy, it looks like. But this seems to be the way of the world in Europe.
Right, that's right. So they're what I think what they fear is the Franco and the Hitler and the de Gaulle, one person ruling it.
So just we love our system, and then the Europeans and other countries seem to love their system. But, is there any hope for that the Europeans or anybody else would ever change to a different system that would actually, not create so much chaos for them in a lot of these cases?
Well, I mean, Brexit was a pretty big step. So could it happen? Yeah, it could happen. If that could happen, it could happen. But, there's too much incentives to keep doing what you're doing.
Well, you've got all these people with jobs, right? It's like, yeah. if you actually made it an efficient government, it would mean fewer jobs, right?
Right. And that's what at the end of the, it's like you get into the school debate, right? And so at the end of the day, they treat schools as a jobs program. They don't think about it as the mission is to educate the kids.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's how many, for most of my life, at least my adult life, I mean, there's, Republicans have talked about trying to, make government more efficient, and Reagan, I think he truly had a desire to cut the size of the federal government, get rid of some of these departments and streamline. And
I think Clinton did too.
Yeah.
I think Clinton, there were forces working against him, but, he came in saying the era of big government's over. He had that commission for reducing government and reducing, waste and so forth in government. So I think he gave it a little more than lip service.
Yeah, and now here we are, 40 plus years past Reagan, and the government is bigger than ever.
Right, and nobody cares.
Nobody cares.
They know. I mean, it's really that's one of the sort of the good things about the debt ceiling debate we had a few months ago is that it did evince some concern about the debt and endless trillion and a half, $2 trillion spending bills. Right? Congress finally said, okay, there is a limit to what we think we should do here, and that limit had not been expressed for a long time. Basically, when Trump was president, he farmed it out to Steve Mnuchin, who made the deal with Pelosi because he couldn't stand to talk to her. So, kind of whatever Steve Mnuchin and Pelosi came up with, the administration went along with. They didn't have any more shutdowns. They only had one shutdown in Trump. It was over a wall funding, over $3 billion. Right? That's a rounding error. That's what the whole thing was, over $3 billion.
Yeah, look, I think every time I get into these discussions about big government and things like this, I will go back to my father, who worked for the federal government in the Federal Reserve and retired in 1977. And then the early 70s, he was saying the Fed was too big. That was in the 70s.
Yeah.
He was complaining when the Federal Reserve, when he first started working for them, they had a building on Constitution Avenue. And it was one of the, and if you go down there, all that area down there is these great old classic government buildings, with the marble halls, and they're kind of neat. I mean, they're huge. I mean, they were built in a different era for a different way of work. So they're terribly inefficient as a workspace in today's world. So, but in the early 70s, the Fed decided, well, they were adding more economists and more blah, 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 blah. And they built like a 12 or 13 story building right behind it, which took them a few years to build. And my father was just incredulous because it's just like, why? It's like, why?
Right. You guys of all people, don't be adding staff.
Yeah, no, I mean, and we see what happens as a result of all of this. And, there is, you're not going to have a lot of government workers that are saying government's too big, because they're always worried about maybe it's their job that's going there. And the politicians, they all know that, cutting government, it sounds good and it gets some people excited, but for those that they employ and all that stuff, they're like, don't cut my job.
Right. But here's where this leads. Okay. So one of the things that the MRC has dug out recently is there's something called the Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention Program, TVTP. It's located within the Department of Homeland Security. It was started in the Obama administration as a response to 9/11. To if there are groups bubbling up below the surface and we can identify them early and get inside of them and stop them, that's a good idea, right? So by the time Trump became president, he didn't really care about it, and they had marked it for elimination. When Biden promised on the campaign trail that he would eliminate it, but when he got to be president and named Mayorkas to head the DHS, Mayorkas came to him with an idea, and he said, "Let's use this thing to give grants to people to basically harass conservatives." I don't know if you heard about this. So one of the groups they gave it to was something called Project Ohio, which was run out of the University of Dayton. And these guys, so they had this like the food pyramid, you eat this, then this and this, work your way up, right? So this was a pyramid of conservative radicalization. And the groups at the top were like Daily Stormer and, hardcore Nazi, this and that, okay? At the bottom, okay, you're on your first step on the ladder to radicalization, to belonging to taking the Daily Stormer newspaper on your front porch. The first step was being involved with these organizations, which included the NRA, the Heritage Foundation, the Republican National Committee, CBN, right, Christian Broadcasting Network. So the second one on like Prager and those guys were on the second level, Charlie Kirk, Turning Point. Right. So then there was a third level. Those guys started to have swastikas in their logos. And then the top level was, the hardest core ones. Right. So, this was the kind of crap. This was under the aegis of teaching people to to read and think critically, to understand the media that we're seeing. This is what these people were telling them. The guy who's teaching it was an avowed Antifa leader, right? He told them that in the class. They had the seminars, right? So, they were basically using $40 million of U.S. government money to pay these groups to attack and undermine. The whole idea was to get them linked to terrorism or Nazi groups or, domestic terrorists or whatever, and then go to their banks and their donors and say, hey, you need to cut these guys off because they're terrorist groups, right? So they got caught and they go, oh, that's not what we were doing. But the Appropriations Committee has gone through the DHS appropriations and they zeroed this out and some other programs that were operate on the same kind of principles. So this is kind of thing when you start talking about big government and giving these guys money to solve all these problems, this is where it ends up, right? They're talking about, we're in a period now where they don't care about weaponizing government. They don't care about using all this against us. So, you can't count on them to do the decent thing. And they were not doing the decent thing here at all, So and I think more to come on this kind of stuff. But, when you start thinking about, we're just going to make a budget deal and, add 2% and keep going, this is the kind of stuff that falls through the cracks. This is the kind of stuff that we don't get it out, look at it and examine it and see what it's doing, whether it's meeting its mission, and get rid of it.
Yeah. Sometimes I get the impression, with the Biden administration is just that they can, when it comes to handing out grants and stuff like that, they can be almost a shadow Soros type organization.
Yeah.
You give it the government imprimatur, and say, so it's a government funded study here, but it would be something that George Soros would have funded otherwise,
right?
Because there's a certain outcome they're looking for, and that's why they did that. But it's
right.
your money and my money,
right?
That's doing this.
Right. There's a lot of these things in there where they're it's like, public broadcasting. We've talked about this before, right? Public broadcasting is people like you and me paying money to propagate views to which we are diametrically opposed, being forced to do it. Okay, right? That's what all that stuff is. Stop doing that. Stop spending my money to push views that I don't share. Right? Don't spend leftist money to push conservative views, right? Don't do that. Get government out of that. Quit pushing views.
Yeah, that would be a good situation. All right, let's move on to Hunter Biden, because he's supposed today. I think they said he's supposed to plead guilty to what the media is reporting as his minor tax crimes, and this whole plea deal that was announced a month ago or more than that, or whatever. It's like, come on. I mean, it's like you, me, and, pretty much the average American. If we had done what Hunter Biden did, we would not get this slap on the wrist type of a thing, right?
Well, okay. So it depends on how you ask that question. So by the time they had reduced the penalty to what it was, and he did to lessen his exposure, he borrowed a bunch of money and sold these paintings, which is another thing that's kind of come back to bite him behind. Right, because it turns out that donors, trying to curry favor with the administration, were the buyers of the paintings, right? And like one of them has been, rewarded with a cushy appointment that she was after, and so forth. So, but he used that to pay down what he owed. Right? He didn't pay it all off, but he paid off a lot of it. Made some big payments in it. And if you make payments to the IRS, no matter how far behind you are, how much you owe, they go easy on you. If people who are trying to pay, they back off and let you pay, even if it takes a long time. So, he was charged with 2. There's like 7, so they knocked out 5 and they've knocked down the penalty of the 2. Okay. So now if you say, the penalty for the 2 is roughly in line with most people get for that. Yeah, it is roughly in line because you've knocked out 5. Right. So, the other thing is they take a charge that he lied on a gun form by saying he was not on drugs when he was on drugs, but that they will have pretrial diversion and he won't take his felony on that. There's some question about whether the judge will accept this plea. There's some questions about whether they will go for this. So, this is a hearing today. I don't think he gets to finish today. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
So are the Republicans who are complaining about this deal, are they right though, in terms of to say that,
it's a sweetheart deal, So, but what the Democrats will say is, okay, well, anyone with those, 2 tax charges that are the what he's actually been charged with, yeah, that's about what they would get. Yeah, it is about what they would get. But they would have been, average person wouldn't have been just charged with those 2 things. They'd have been charged with much more. But, he's got it down to 2 because he's the president's son. He's this president's son.
Yeah, yeah, as you pointed out, the thing is that there are more tax charges. They take 2 of the lesser charges in essence, so that it looks like he's just an average person, and they can just slap him on the wrist for that. But the average person wouldn't generally get all these charges reduced like this.
Right. And, why was he not? One of the questions I believe the judges want to know is, why was he not charged with foreign agent, not registering as a foreign agent? Because he obviously was acting as one. He can't claim he won. Otherwise, what was it Burisma giving you $83,000 a year for? Either you were a representative or they were just giving you $83,000 a year, right? There's no good answer to that for him. So there's also in the last week, it has been revealed, and we talked about this before. Joe Biden got up that day in Ukraine, told that story about when he was in Ukraine, and he said, we told the guys, that you're not getting your $1 billion unless you fire this guy. I'm leaving in 6 hours. And what do you know? They fired the guy. Well, they didn't fire the guy. Joe's story on that has always been they fired him because he was not prosecuting. So now what they have is evidence that it was, as we've always suspected, is that it's exactly the opposite. They fired him because he was prosecuting. And not only because he was prosecuting, but because he was prosecuting, he was investigating Burisma and the involvement of the Bidens with Burisma. So he was after Joe. Joe got him canned, and then Joe is caught on tape bragging about, yeah, I said, we will withhold U.S. foreign aid to Ukraine until you fire the guy who's investigating me. Right? That's a pretty clear line of action there. That's that's pretty easy criminal act for Americans to follow. Okay, so the assumption is, if you wait, you get all the evidence piled up, and this guy, you're going to have a guy testify. The last date I heard was next Monday, named Devin Archer, who's his former business partner, who was in the middle of all this, who's going to testify that Joe was in the middle of all these deals, and his name was being used to get money from these people and to promise outcomes that, Joe could deliver because of his position with the government as the vice president. And he has the receipts. It's going to be hard to deny. So right now, the Speaker of the House is talking about a timeline of a impeachment probe beginning in September, and some kind of conclusion by the end of that month or October over whether to impeach Biden. But if after this testimony, I wouldn't be surprised if the clock moved up some, because it's pretty darn compelling and it can't really be rebutted or explained away, because you can't say this guy's getting anything for it, because he's going to go to jail for his involvement in these acts. So he's just saying, here's what my co-conspirators did. Now, so that happens, and here's the part people need to understand. When Trump was impeached twice, most people, even Democrats, understood those to be political impeachments. He didn't, Trump printed, he put out the transcript of the perfect call with Zelensky, and he the impeachment at the end about January 6th was always obviously political in nature, and will meet the same fate as I believe a lot of these court cases will. They're trying to prove Trump knew he had lost and did all this anyway. They're never going to be able to prove that, because Trump to this day does not think he lost. So you will have Biden in a lot of trouble Trump getting indictments that are viewed immediately as politically motivated to get off the Biden trouble, and a very different look to the political landscape in about 2 weeks. So it'll be interesting what they do, see what they do. My guess is they will impeach him, and they may impeach some other people too. There's talk of impeaching Mayorkas, and I think that's the farthest along, and the Attorney General Garland and some others. So, they're headed for some hard times, and they may beat all this stuff, but they're going to spend the whole next 2 years fighting it, which, that's what they reap. So that's what they should sow.
Yeah, I just want the Republicans to make sure that they tread carefully with anything regarding impeachment, that you need to have the solid, irrefutable evidence for everything that you're going to do forward here. You do not want to go down the political path that the Democrats did. That's just not a winning strategy for them at all. I think McCarthy is probably, at least he's listening to the conservatives that have hounded him about at least looking into this. So he's giving them that. We'll see where this all goes in the end. But overall, whether or not it's an impeachment inquiry, whether or not it's an impeachment, it's Hunter's issues from the art sale, which was pretty sketchy with the people who bought the art, to his tax troubles and all this kind of stuff. How much of this, hurts Biden on his reelection? Are voters going to take that into account, or are the Democrats and the media going to be able to convince their support, their base, that this is nothing, Biden's the guy and this is nothing?
Yeah, that's their current strategies. They don't have any evidence. They have a mountain of evidence. Okay, it hasn't come out yet. You may not know it. The committee has it. You look on their website; it's already there. But there's a mountain of evidence. The other thing is, don't be so sure. If the case is made, right, and you're right, they need to make sure that they have their I's dotted and their T's crossed pretty carefully on this. But if they do, don't be surprised if the Democrats abandon Biden, right? Because let's think about it. There's probably about 8 or 9 people in the Senate who see themselves as little presidents, right? The president inside me that no one has seen yet. Okay, if you knock out Biden, then it's a free for all on that side, right? There's no dominant candidate. Kamala, I guess, would serve out his term, but she wouldn't have the power to do anything. She'd be constrained by people on both sides of the aisle from doing too much. She would be a caretaker, and we would get to 2024. And if she ran, she probably would not. That would be a pretty easy win for Trump, I think. And then all these other guys are going to get in. Gavin Newsom, other Republican governors, Cuomo may try it. He's not that disgraced anymore, I guess. The guy in Illinois, Pritzker, was talking about it. There could be a lot of people come out of the woodwork then. Okay, but all of them are on the sidelines unless something bad happens to Joe. And here would be something that you can say, hey, you look at the facts. This one's hard to argue, right? This is a fairly straightforward. We've got phone calls and texts of him being used to get this money. Here's bank receipts of the money being received and distributed. Here's tax forms that don't include the money, right? So he has this is fairly straightforward, fairly easy for Americans to understand. And there's some self-interest among Republicans in voting to get rid of him. So I wouldn't be. I'm a Democrat, so I would not be so sure that he would survive it if he does get impeached.
Yeah, I want Kamala to stay around as long as possible, at least, because that's good for the Republicans, because she's bad for the Democrats. She cannot be out there on the campaign trail and be effective either. These two, this pair is like the worst pair you could find for the Democrats at this point in time. I'm just like, you two are actually, this is really running for the presidency this time, as opposed to last time when you could be in the garage and we had the pandemic that gave you cover and the media gave you cover. You've got to be out there, and Kamala opens her mouth it's just, Democrats are like, how did we how do we let this happen? Joe, he never knows which direction he's supposed to go getting off a stage, and all these other things. And it's just, it's a very sad reflection on the state of America right now when with the way with who we've got in there as a president. I mean, I'm not going to play politics on the president in terms of, I want a president who represents America and does a good job for America right now. And he's an embarrassment and she's an embarrassment.
Yeah, that's absolutely. And I read this morning, maybe the most drubbed comment I've ever seen on Twitter, which I guess is now X. Heather Cox Richardson, is a leftist journalist. Because I've been reading speeches lately and Kamala's are really good. For what? I mean, she seemingly doesn't have anything to say. She won't study, and she has made some efforts. I think someone got to her about how bad she was, and she's tried to get a little better. But I mean, she still doesn't have anything to say. It's still just all gibberish.
Yeah, I think the whole thing with Kamala has probably perplexed a lot of Democrats. Is like, we thought we had a solid potential replacement for Biden after he served 2 terms, and she has failed at every turn.
I believe they've concluded that they need another answer.
Yeah, and as I think you said towards the beginning of the program, just that in terms of Biden's own support level and popularity among Democrats, it's not high at all. So right. There's a low confidence there that any opportunity where for Biden to exit the stage and they can bring somebody else in, there will be a lot of people waiting to jump in on this and try to strengthen and improve the ticket at this point, because it's kind of hard to see, except for the people that are out there that are still anti-Trump and anybody but Trump. Hard to see that a whole lot of Democrats are going to have a lot of enthusiasm. Right? I mean, you see news reports all the time. I mean, they talk to Biden. Biden voters from 2020, and a lot of them are pretty disillusioned. So it's hard to,
a lot of them,
hard for them to vote
people of color. The other one is that cracks me up. It's like, so every day, some TV network gets Chris Christie on to bash Trump, right? Like, I'll get me on that debate stage. I'll take him on. It's like, to do what, right? You're going to yell out a bunch of stuff, and people are going to go, "Shut up, Chris," and that will be it. You're at 0% in the polls for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, look, Christie, he's kind of like the nuclear missile at this point in time. I mean, he's right. he's not getting support.
He's Buster Douglas. He's trying to land one punch.
Yeah, and the media loves this because the guy is pugnacious and he's willing to say things about Trump a lot of people aren't willing to say. And he's willing to take on any of Trump's barbs and whatever and do that. And it doesn't bother him. Whether or not that's going to have any effect on anything, is questionable, right. Because it doesn't seem like anything that he said has really hurt Trump, right. on a polling basis.
Right.
So
one even knows he's there, except for these Acela corridor left-wing journalists,
Yeah, and if he doesn't get on the debate stage, then where is his voice? I mean, right. Even at that point, the media might start just saying, well, he can't get enough support to get even to qualify for the debate stage. He's not a serious candidate anymore. Right. And so they'd be willing to move on. What are you making about a potential third indictment for Trump coming down, maybe today or sometime this week?
Okay, I think that we're getting into the thing where he's getting indicted for stuff. I think the original one about the classified documents. There's not a criminal law, so there's no if you do this wrong, you'll go to jail, right? So they kind of had to change what they charged him with and sort of make some new laws to have something criminal to charge him with, right? So you could get to that one where you could get to it and say, okay, some of these were he had not properly classified them and whatnot, right? There's a chance of proving some of that, right? Okay, but if you and again, that's not Obama has all of his. He's never turned them over, and they're locked up, and he don't let anybody in. And all this NARA's worked out something. NARA was told to fly a kite, and being his NARA is staffed with leftists who love Obama. They went out and flew the kite. So, it's a two-tier standard of justice, but that one you might get some traction on. But the rest of these, one is about electors. Okay, electors are legal, right? If you're going to are legal. If you're going to contest an election, right, and they say, oh yeah, you're right, the Democrats are out. Where are your electors? And if you don't have them picked, then they put the Democrats back in, and you lose, right? So you have to have them. When they select the electors, they do it publicly and they send out a press release. Here are our electors. This is no crime. So a lot of these things are, they picked electors. Well, electors are not a crime. So I don't see any problem for him there. The lady in Georgia is trying to prosecute him in connection with the phone call to the Secretary of State, right? How did we find out what was in that phone call? Trump released the transcript, right? As soon as people raised questions about it, Trump's like, well, put this out because I didn't do anything wrong. So, they have this thing and say, fine, you just find 11,000 votes. Oh, look at that crooked stuff he did. Okay. But that's like, there's a place in the Bible where it says there is no God, right? Right before it says the fool says there, so the Bible is not saying there is no God. He is not saying do anything illegal. He's saying there are many avenues that you could potentially find corruption here, which he had detailed in the call, and go get one of those and go stop this corruption and find my 11,000 votes, right? That is a perfectly normal phone call for a guy to make. You're not going to send him to jail behind that call. Now the one that people are thinking that Jack Smith is going to bring in Washington has to do, the whole thing turns on proving that Trump knew he had lost and was doing all this stuff anyway. And they will never, ever, ever, ever prove that because Trump to this day does not think he lost, right? His honest, people told him that. Other people told him he won, right? And he believes he won. And at least half the people in the country agree with him. So you're not going to convict him of having believed that he lost when you have no proof that he believed he lost. So the rest of the stuff falls apart, and all the text with Mark Meadows and all that is hoogly googly.
All right. So while you were talking, the thing just popped up. There's been a little bump in the road about the Hunter Biden deal.
Okay.
And it says that the judge called a 10-minute recess because the prosecutors and defense lawyers disagreed about the terms of the plea agreement, with Biden insisting any guilty plea encompass immunity from any other criminal charges. So this is because Representative Jason Smith said that he wanted the judge to reject the deal. And so she's basically saying, okay, you guys have got to come to an agreement here. We're going to call a recess, and you have to agree on this plea deal. So it's not a done deal, which is kind of what you had said, right? You said that they have a problem here. And yes, this is not all smooth sailing here for Hunter because
if they agree not to prosecute him for any other crimes, that's ridiculous. We burned down the courthouse then.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's fair. It's like you don't just grant him immunity for all this other stuff,
right? Not when you know that there's a lot more out there. And also, supposedly the U.S. attorney in Delaware, the holdover Trump appointee, who was actually a big time buddy of the Bidens, but that's another story. Says that he's still working on this case. Right? You can't grant immunity if the U.S. attorney is still investigating it.
Yeah. So one last thing before we kind of wind things down here, I guess, or thereabouts, or maybe a couple of things. So I didn't put this down, but I saw a headline of an article about in the Post online about inflation because inflation is cooling. It's kind of taking away a talking point for the Republicans in the election, and they may have to rethink their strategy. Now, on the surface, my without reading the article yet, I'm saying it's like, but cooling from what? A comparison, because we have talked about this at length. It's like inflation is still high compared to where it was before, this is, yeah, it is down from where it was a year ago, but let's go back to when Biden was elected and look at the whole of Bidenomics, as Joe Biden is trying to tell us that it's Bidenomics is working. And, there's inflation there that is not going away.
Right. Well, I mean, people don't understand that rate is the rate of growth, right? Inflation is still climbing by that much, right? But it's not going down, and it's still climbing at more than twice the rate it was when Trump left office, right? It was 1.4 when Trump left. It's still over 3.
The rate is decelerating, right?
Right. Yeah. The rate is decelerating. We're not at 9 anymore. We're down to 3, which that's good, but you're still twice what Trump was. Gas is still 52% higher and going up. Groceries are still 27% higher and going up. The things we actually have to buy every day are much, much higher, and they're still going up. And he hasn't done anything to address all that. He's trying to buy time with the economy with a massive bunch of federal spending. That's a temporary thing because you can't keep doing that. You can't keep building all this stuff over and over and over. So he basically, one of the things he's done is set it up where the next president has a real physical problem, and because nothing's been addressed. And the other is it's a really soft economy. The last jobs report, it was supposed to be 300,000. It was 200,000, and 500,000 people went from full time to part time, which is usually a precursor to a really bad period economically. And, you have on here, the Fed is expected to lift the rates again. And that's why they're lifting the rates, because they see this softness in the economy, and they see that, the job numbers are not, the Biden people talk about are not real. And the economy is much softer than they're letting on.
Yeah, my last thing before we wrap this up here, so it's just so on CNN this morning, I'm at the gym and I'm watching and talking about how gas prices dropped a nickel overnight, which was a big increase. And says, but they couched it in terms of but it's still better than the $5 a gallon we were paying last year. It's let's come on.
But yeah. But I mean, you caused that too,
Oh man, I don't know. People wake up. All right, Brian, wrap it up.
I'm trying to get my list to come back. Give me just a sec here. What else we not covered? We did a pretty good job of getting to the list today. As prices, Bronny James. So there was an interesting thing. The son of LeBron James had a cardiac event in basketball practice yesterday. Was taken to the hospital. Looks like he's going to be fine. Big debate followed over, myocarditis and the vaccines. Was are you more vulnerable if you took the vaccines? Good for him that he's going to be okay. But I think we're going to see as this vaccinated group of people works its way through, you're going to see heightened incidents of this kind of stuff. And I hope that one of the things I saw this morning was don't be in the gym alone, right? If you're in there working, have somebody with you, which a lot of that's a big, hard thing for basketball players because a lot of them go by themselves and go spend some time in the gym. And so to tell them that they need to have somebody with them will be a big change for someone.
Yes, recover well, be well, Bronny. We our thoughts and prayers for the James family. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us again today. As always, stay safe, stay well. Remember, we live in the greatest country in the world. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. And God bless America. And we will see you again next week.